Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for chapter 34, section 1. And we're going to talk a little bit about new era, following the Cold War, kind of moving from the 1990s into the 2000s. In 1991, we had the culminating fall of communism. And one of the things that happened is the old communist nation of Yugoslavia is one of those nations that had actually been in dispute for a number of years. Matter of fact, a lot of people believe that the events that surround World War One actually were finally brought to a close when we get to the 1990s and we start dividing Yugoslavia into regions based on ethnicity. Anyway, there was violence in 1991 between Serbians who were Orthodox Christians and some of our Bosnians who some were Muslims. And this led to bloodshed between those ethnic Serbs under the leadership of Slobodan Milosevic. Milosevic is a guy that was kind of ruthless, kind of brutal, but he certainly had no like for the Muslims that were from Bosnia. And thus, he basically implements a policy of ethnic cleansing, with which is the whole idea of like trying to eliminate an ethnic group from society by either forced killing or forced immigration. Um, the photos that you see at the bottom right hand corner, or the photo that you see there, is actually of a Bosnian Muslim who, for the most part, looks very emaciated, meaning that he looks like he's being starved to death. Many of these refugees were placed in camps, and this is what they look like. It's almost like the equivalent of a concentration camp. And Milosevic and his government were the ones who did this. Thus, we're going to have some issues down the line. The map that you see here is actually a map of the former nation of Yugoslavia, but it's been divided into some different parcels. Yugoslavia, as I mentioned before, was an area that was once part of the old Austrian Hungarian Empire. And you can probably see that because Austria and Hungary kind of border what used to be Yugoslavia. But there are many different ethnic groups. Up in the north, you have the Slovenians and the Croats. Many of these people have ties to the Catholic Church. When you talk about Serbia and parts of Kosovo, these are regions that have ties to Orthodox Christianity, kind of in line with either the Russian Orthodox or the Greek Orthodox Church. And then you have Muslims who, during the time of the Ottoman Empire, were living here. And thus, all these different groups have a desire to have their own nation. And thus, that was part of the reason why we had the beginnings of World War One back in 1914. But when we get into the post war world of World War One, and then eventually into World War Two, nobody is going back to divide this territory up into new nations for ethnic groups. They formed the nation of Yugoslavia instead. And thus, when communism ends, there's a desire to form new nations, and we're going to have war that's going to break out. And thus, in 1995, after a number of events, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which the United States is a member of, is going to send peacekeepers who were soldiers that literally were acting like cops. They were there to kind of maintain order and trying to allow for the Bosnian forces to regain territory that they had lost to the Serbians under Milosevic. Anyway, violence ended in Bosnia in 1995, and many of these different leaders signed an agreement known as the Dayton Accords. One of them being Slobodan Milosevic. But in 2000, Milosevic, his rule ended and he was taken into custody for war crimes. You saw those pictures a moment ago of the emaciated Bosnian Muslims in those concentration camps. Well, he's the guy who did that. And as he was waiting his trial, he died. But had Milosevic gone to trial, he would have been probably the first um, person to be convicted in a war crimes trial since the Nuremberg trials following World War II, when many of the Nazis, top Nazis, were prosecuted for their crimes against humanity. Thank you very much.